Hello guys and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to show you how to fix common problems and clean a PS3 controller. So let's get started. Okay guys, so now the first step is to turn the controller and then get all 5 screws. Now, the problems I have with this controller is that the left joystick has worn out and I have ghost presses and unresponsiveness. So what that means is sometimes when I press the button it doesn't record the press, and sometimes when I'm not even touching the controller it records presses. So we're going to fix that. We're going to clean the controller and replace the left joystick. So you can start by taking all 5 screws out of the controller casing. You can see this controller is really old. This is the original controller that came with this PlayStation 3, and you can see also that the tag on the back is really worn out. Now also what you want to do is set the screws in an order so you know exactly from which hole they came from. Even though they are the same size, it's not really that good to mix up. So keep the screws in the exact same hole they came out of. Okay, so once you get all 5 screws out of the casing, you want to lift off the back from the down part. So you want to pay attention to the triggers, especially if you're not planning to actually clean this, so you don't want to just mess these up because they're really hard to get back into. So you're gonna come from the bottom and then just go ahead and pry upwards, and don't get it out on the top side. Leave it stuck there, and then once it gets to this point you want to just push forward and around the triggers. Now if you don't want to remove the triggers in case you're not cleaning them. So you're gonna get to this part here and you're gonna see the battery, which will sit into its leg spot into the motherboard, and you want to just come out and get this connector for the battery out first. This is the recommended thing to do. It can be a little tricky, but it's worth the time. So once you get the battery out, the next thing is to get out the screw that holds the motherboard in place. Now, since I'm going to clean this, I'm going to remove the triggers, so you just get them out. This is optional if you're just fixing it. So once you remove the triggers now you're going to see the vibration motors. Now they are different sizes, so you can get different intensities, and then you can remove the screw that holds the motherboard in place. Now once the screw comes out, this is going to be one of the hardest screws to get out. There are only 6 screws I could find into this controller. Then you are going to lift again from the bottom part, but also take care that the top corners don't get hooked into that plastic piece. And also take care about the cables that hold the motherboard hooked to the vibration motors. You don't want to break them. They're really fragile. And in the case they come off the motherboard, you can solder them back onto the motherboard, onto the connectors they came out of. So you lift the motherboard, and now it's time to take out the joysticks. Now in order to do that, you just pull them upwards, straight up, not on an angle, just straight up, and they come out. Also, you will notice that they have an oval shape, so they can't be twisted around, so they stay into the exact same angle they were originally put. So you can see when you're putting down the new joystick, you can see that it can go in only one position because it has this oval shape to the hole. So we're gonna get out both joysticks because we need to clean everything up really well. Now these joysticks are identical one to another, the left and right, And now the next part is to lift off this plastic ribbon connector, and then you can see down under there is a sponge. Now the next part is to lift the main part from the chassis. So that is done by 2 clips on each side of the vibration motors. So you can see there that little part, you just push it in and it just comes loose and clips off the main casing. So when that comes out, you can see it comes with this contact pads that make the buttons contact with the motherboard. So then you come and remove these rubber bushings here, these rubber pads. They hold all the buttons in place, and the start and select buttons are actually the ones you see outwards, these rubber pieces. Then you want to remove all of the plastic buttons that are into the controller. Now you don't need to remember exactly their position because they have special legs, so to speak, which come only one way. So you can't mistake the hole or the orientation of the button because they are unique and they have unique mappings. And then when you're done, you're gonna left with this casing, these buttons, these rubber parts, and the motherboard with the vibration buttons and the main chassis. And that's what we're gonna focus our attention to is going to be. Now you can go and wash them in the sink, all the buttons and the casings, and let them dry. Now this sponge is the part that causes the ghost presses and the unresponsiveness to happen. So you get this part and you cut one cardboard piece to the exact same size. So this sponge, what happens is that it gets pushed down, it just gets squished, and then it doesn't come to the exact same shape it was, so it's thinner than when it left the factory. So the ribbon doesn't make the exact correct contact with the motherboard. So what that is going to we're going to raise the sponge with that cardboard piece so that it makes better contact. That's all it takes to fix that part. So once you get your casing, and now it's clean inside. Now the part with the motherboard, you can also wipe it with a towel if you want to, but not a wet towel, just a dry towel if you want it clean, a paper towel I mean. And you can also do with those rubber parts that hold the buttons. Now you'll be also left with these 2 parts that hold the triggers in place. And now we have these parts clean. And what I noticed into the trigger rubber is that on the upper part, on the down part, excuse me, is yellowed. And that yellowed, what happens, you can see that's clear, and now you can see this is yellowed in the bottom part. Now that yellowing to the plastic happens when you expose it to heat or UV rays. Now what happened, I assume, because this controller sits on the table and right there is the heater, and what I suspect is that by sitting next to the heater in the winter, the heat goes into the down part of the triggers and yellowed this rubber plastic. So I'm gonna stop putting the controller next to the heater, and you can also take note of that. So once you've cleaned all these parts, all these joysticks and all these buttons, now this is the one that you wipe with a paper towel, and now you also have here the triggers. Now one thing I've done is I've got a needle and I just started to go into the number and just get out all the dirt I could by cleaning inside the number. Now note, when you're washing these, don't use a brush because it's too hard for this plastic. It's really soft for these plastic buttons and casings, and it's going to cause micro scratches. Use just your hand along soap and water, and occasionally a towel or a paper towel. So we're going to start by putting the D-pad into its correct spot, and now we are going to put the buttons. Now note these are the buttons that we're going to be putting in, and you can't mistake the hole or the orientation of the button because they have special legs and you can't put it into the wrong hole. So if you try to put it into the wrong hole, it's not going to go in because they have these unique legs that just don't let them sit. So you can see I was trying to put the X button in the square button hole and it won't go in. Now, once it aligns, it's going to just go in and you'll see it dropping. It doesn't require force. So once that's done, we're going to put the PlayStation button, which also has those special legs, and then we're going to put the rubber paddings on. So these are the rubber paddings. You don't want them in this orientation, you want them with the graphite parts up. So these are semiconductors, and well, they are actually conductors because carbon is the only conductor which is not a metal. So these carbon parts are going to go upward. So these are just graphite parts. So they come upwards and they establish the contact and they transmit the signal back to the motherboard. So that's actually how it works. And these can also get worn up, and it's not going to work the same way as it does before. So after a really long time, these should be also replaced. So once we put the PlayStation button back inside, we can put the last rubber part, which is the start, select, and PlayStation button rubbers. Okay, so now we can proceed to the next part. So once you've finished with this part where we put all the buttons back inside, we're going to come and we need to put these plastic parts which have the contacts, which I'm going to just give them a little wipe now. And we need to put the plastic piece that support the trigger buttons and just put that inside there. So you're just going to come and it just should slide right in. So now we come on the other side and you want to put this plastic piece oriented this way. So I'm going to just zoom in for this one so you can see way better. So what you need to do is just slide this into the plastic part. So you come with it and it just slides. And you can see those little legs that support that plastic piece there. Now they should come under this frame. So all you can see are these contact parts. Now this is going to be a little tricky, so you'll want to spend your time here. You don't want to break anything. Again, be careful with those vibration motors, cables. You don't want to break those. Those wires are quite important. If you break one, you will lose vibration from that motor. Okay, so once we slide this on, and you could see that on this right one it was quite tricky to get these on. we're going to proceed to the next part. So now you have to put these rubber parts on inside. They should just slide in like this. Now the wider part, you'll notice that on one side they have a wider end. Now that part is upwards, as you can see right here. And also you might notice that one button is flat and one has a hole, and you can see that graphite inside. So that part with a hole is upwards. So now what we have left to do is to just put this whole part back into the main shell. So I'm gonna just twist this motherboard upwards so it gets out of the way. So you want to get that plastic contact upwards again on top of that white plastic part. Now once you get this in, which can be a little tricky, especially for some parts, you're going to clip those vibration motors part back in. So you can see these clips, one of them just got into, so just clipped in. So I'm just going to take it out. If you see it doesn't sit, don't force it, just take it out and just come one more time, making sure everything is fine. So we get that part up, and then we are just going to slide those plastic housings for the trigger buttons the way they should. So you put them to 90 degrees to the white plastic part, and now it should just slide right in and sit. So then you can clip these parts. You can see the clips on the left and right side of the motors just getting into the frame, so they should sit by their own. So now we are going to put the joysticks back in. Again, they come in only one orientation, so they can't be spinned because they have that oval shape to that inside part of the stick. So the next part is make sure that these sit onto this just the way they should, so they just sit perfectly, and on the down part they have a notch that should just sit onto the main plastic part. Now if you see that it doesn't sit the way it is, just get it with a screwdriver and try to reset it. And now I'm going to just try and put the motherboard back in without getting under the motherboard any wires. But now the first part we need to do is to put that cardboard and a sponge part down there and just put the contact part back in. So let's do that right now. Let me focus the camera. So you can see everything is on the way it is. These two parts sit on 90 degrees to the main plastic part. And now you just get these buttons. This is the 1, so you just want it with the 1 letter. So the upper part of the number, you want it to be on to the black shell. So that part that sits right there, you can see it on one side. There's like a deck, and that one you want it to be oriented to you. So you can see that again, the button has this little deck on one side of it. On the bottom it has that little deck, and that should just sit oriented onto your direction. Now you can see that one of the buttons doesn't sit the way it should, so you just have to push the plastic part down under. Now what happened is that this plastic part you can see it just got out. So it doesn't sit this white plastic part. So we're going to try and reseat that. Now don't apply too much force to it because you don't want to break these. So if there is a problem, you can always just take that button out again and then just reseat it. So what happens is that there is also a notch in which these white plastic parts, it's like a rail in which they should sit in. So you want to make sure that they sit into that rail. And then just try to put the button back in. Okay, so now if it clicks, that means it's well seated. So now we're going to get the cardboard piece first. And what we need to do is just lift off this plastic part, put the cardboard piece on, then get the sponge, because this is not really a rubber, this is more of a sponge. If you look into it, it has pores. So we're going to just get that in. And then reseat it to these little plastic legs that come out. Now notice that the left one has a little hook onto its end. So the left part, the left hole of this plastic part that comes in has a little leg on it. This one has a little hook onto the end of it, so it just doesn't let it get out like the right one does, which is just straight. So now we're going to just seat the motherboard in. And once you do that, you'll feel that to the bottom of the motherboard there's applied more pressure to it. So that means it does just the right contact with the motherboard, so the buttons will be right. So now these white plastic parts that support the triggers should go on top of the motherboard and support it. Now you can also see down there the cardboard and the sponge just supporting the contacts onto the motherboard. So now, just to make sure that we don't lose those contacts and that it stays seated, we are going to put that black screw off the motherboard back in. Now tighten this by as much as you feel, as much as it just goes to resist, but don't push it too hard because you might break the plastics, because this is not screwed into metal or something, it's screwed into plastic, so it breaks. It can break the threads if you're not paying attention and you screw it too hard. So I'm just going to clean it a little bit up because it got quite dirty just by sitting on the table without any protection, because there was all some dirt that came out off the shell into some inaccessible places. So now you can just put a mat. Now if you don't have one mat, you can put a mouse pad, but make sure it's not one of those hard mouse pads made out of plastic. It's one of those cloth made ones, so you're not scratching your controller. So now the part that is one of the hardest ones is to put the triggers back into their spot. Now you can see that they have the little spring, so we are just going to sit it. So what happens with that spring, you just put it in and you can see it has to just sit and just get its support from that white plastic part that it sits on. So you can see it right there, and the other end is into the trigger itself, and then you just put it into these So you put the cylinders back into that support, and you can see it just sits, and then you can see the spring just putting tension to it. So let me explain that spring so you can see it really well. So you can see it's like a V shape. Now the left part of the V goes inside the trigger, and you hold the right part of the V with your thumb. And next, what do you do with it? Okay, so you can see that it comes into, and you hold the other part. And then what do you do? The part that you were supporting with your finger, you're just going to support it by that plastic part there, and then just seat the trigger in. And you can see the spring, just how it has tension to the trigger. Now if you don't seat the spring properly, it's still going to work, but you're not going to have that tension into the triggers, so they're going to just stay free. So the next part, which we are going to finish with, is putting the battery in. And once you've done that, you're going to put those legs into the holes into the motherboard, and now it should just sit. Now these clips that hold the motherboard on my controller, they're quite old, and they broken because I have opened the controller before and they aren't the way. Now one mistake that often people do is that they start putting the back shell like that. Now that's wrong. You don't want to start putting it like this, because then you're going to just hook onto the triggers. And what you want to do is come from this side and then get the triggers through and get that part there. Okay, so once that tip comes off onto the other side, you want to just put that around the trigger then. Now, I just messed up the triggers, so you have to take out the shell and then try again, putting the triggers back inside. So now that I put the triggers back inside, we have to try again. Now this can be quite tricky. On my first attempt, it got me half an hour just to put this back shell on. So once you get the tips, just put that part around the trigger top, and then you want to get the clip around the battery, and now it sits. You can feel a lot more tension now that the shell is pushed around, and that's because of that cardboard piece we put in to just hold the contacts. So now you're going to just put all the screws in the holes they came out of. And now the part they need to do is just tighten them halfway, just so they sit. So the screwdriver is quite tricky. Sometimes the tip just gets the screw, it sticks to it by the magnet, and sometimes it doesn't, so it's quite hard to use the screwdriver. Now what you want to do now is to get the screws and tighten them just halfway, just so they just sit in, but you don't want to tighten them all the way because we needed to do something else before, so you just want to tighten them just a little bit. Now you can just hold the shell with a hand until the screws come in just that halfway part. So once you've done that, you want to just tighten the last screw all the way. But don't tighten it too hard, since this is plastic and it's going to break if you tighten it too hard. So then you want to come on the opposite screw right into the top right corner after you finish with the left corner, bottom, and then you come to the middle one and you tighten it all the way. Then you come to the top left one, and then to the bottom right. So you want to do a crisscross pattern so you get even pressure at each time. And that's it, guys. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to share this video if you like it. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more, click that subscribe button. So see you next time on HowToIT.